What's going on, guys? Zura over here. Today is Tuesday, September 10th, and what happens in the chess world on Tuesdays? That's right, Title Tuesday tournament on chess.com that attracts all the strong players from all across the world. Now, most of the chess world right now is in Budapest, where the Olympiad is about to take place starting tomorrow. I'm very excited actually about that tournament. For sure we'll be doing a lot of content on that tournament. I would say it's one of my favorite tournaments to watch because it's country versus country. So team dynamics, I think, makes it really fun. All right, now about the today's Title Tuesday tournament. I usually play this tournament myself, but today I want to do something a little different, actually give you some highlights. And the reason for that, I think earlier on the server, chess.com server restarted, or something happened basically. And before I rejoined back, my, I guess, internet was lagging, or it was the server issue, I'm not sure. And I was not able to join in. And before I restarted my computer and got back, 3 rounds were gone. So technical difficulties basically from both parts. And I started spectating the tournament. Then towards the end, it got really interesting, and I thought, why do not I show some of the highlights of the tournament? What happened? What were some of the critical games? And who won the tournament and how? Cool. By the way, I'm not an expert at commentating. This is kind of like disclaimer, but I would like to do more of it. So do let me know, what do you think about my highlight reviewing skills? All right, I'm actually really curious. Now we are approaching 1,000 subscriber mark. I am very grateful for, and I would definitely want to hear more about what you would like to hear more from me. That being said, let's get to it. First game I thought to show you was played in round 4 between Daniel Naroditsky and Fabiano Caruana. I was watching this game live, so I thought it was interesting. So Daniel starts with e4, Fabi responds with e5, knight f3, knight c6. By the way, Fabi has a course on Chessable from this year about Archangel, all right, Archangel Ruy Lopez, also called Arkhangelsk. a6, bishop a4, knight f6, and Dania decides to go with knight c3. Now that is not the main line here. Short castle or d3 are by far two main moves. Knight c3 is a little bit of a sideline, but I guess a lot of these positions borrow ideas. So knight c3 looks like Italian approach towards the position here. b5, bishop retreats back to b3, and Fabi decides to land on c5 anyways. That is very typical for Archangel Ruy Lopez positions with bishop c5. That is kind of like characteristic. Now white goes knight d5 and d6. I think during the commentary here, Fabi was saying that he missed the move order here, and short castle would be better. And the reason for that is it doesn't allow c3, because then knight takes e4 and king is away, right? So d4 now doesn't make that much sense here, just simply moves the bishop back. Now the difference here apparently is on d6, white can go c3 and d4 immediately on the next move, which would make white's position very good here. For example, there's no knight e4 right now because d4, and if you take there, there's gonna be some trouble on the e file. For example, bishop goes back, apparently queen c2 actually here, attacking the both knights, winning a piece. Computer is suggesting a bizarre move here, king going to d7. Wow, short castle, but it's still +3 for white. All right, so that is a nice move order to know there, instead of here on, since knight is already on d5, c3, d4 makes a lot of sense. So all right, black d6 here, and Daniel does not use the chance. He goes d3. I think he made that move not that fast, but I guess did not notice there the difference between move order. Black plays h6 to stop bishop g5, c3, short castle, rook goes to b8, and bishop to e3. I think white could have still gone with d4 here, bishop a7 and then bishop e3. But Daniel decides to go bishop e3 immediately. Bishops get traded and knight to a5. Instead of knight a5, Fabi was saying after the game probably knight e7 would make more sense, because after bishop retreats on knight a5, that bishop is not really doing much on a5. c5, now d4, white breaks in the center, black plays bishop to b7. Bishop on this diagonal might be a little misplaced after after white goes d5. Computer is suggesting maybe knight c4 would be more closer to equality, putting the pressure on this b2 pawn. All right, bishop b7, d5, b4, bishop goes to d3. Now I think white has a clear advantage. Maybe immediately bishop d3 here, or a3 would make sense. If you take there is a b4 trapping the knight. That's, I think, I was watching Fabi's commentary, and he was concerned about this. Bishop to c8, then knight d2, something along these lines, and pressure on this queenside pawns. So when knight is on a5 there, a lot of times if white manages to here basically put the pressure on the queen side, then knight gets very uncomfortable on the ring. All right, Daniel plays bishop d3. White still in charge here. Bishop retreats back to c8, and now knight goes to d2. Now I think white is really comfortable here. Knight goes to b7, sacrificing the pawn on a6. And practically, for sure, black has a lot of play. This is still far from being clear. Knight d7, bringing the knight to c5 would also make sense, but I think Fabi wanted to bring this knight to c5 to put the pressure on e4, and he didn't mind sacrificing the pawn on a6 for it. If immediately knight c5, then bishops get traded, so he didn't want to trade bishops, so played bishop b7. Now bishop d7, excuse me, bishop takes b7, rook takes b7, and white is basically a pawn up. Rook e1, now a little bit of shuffling here, queen b6, knight c4, and a3. This was, I think, another critical moment where Fabi decided, instead of simplifying position and trying to hold this on one side of the board, he maintains the pressure on the queen side with b3, and in a blitz game you would think that that is what you want. Try to pose as many problems to the opponent as possible. Rook c1, rook to c8, rook e3, and white seems to be in complete control here, but things are far from clear. After rook to c7, seemingly establishing some pressure on the c5, white could have simply taken on b3, and if bishop b5, rook e to c3, and white has enough defenses on this knight on c4, black would have nothing better than to take on e4 and trade some pieces here. If bishop c4, simply queen b4, game over, because now the c5 pin will work in white's favor. If black trades rooks, then rook takes c4, and a similar thing. Either black would have to trade the rooks or get into a south pin, and both cases would definitely here, I think, favor white, something like that. And then queen d6, let's say, should be winning for white, considering these two connected passed pawns. So what happens in the game is rook e to c3, and now black is back in the game here. Immediately knight e4 was a possibility, but that didn't happen. Bishop a4 to defend the b3 pawn. White plays queen f3, and watching this game in live, it felt like this was really off, because now bishop retreats back to b5 to attack this c4 knight, and white is in a lot of trouble. The only way to stop here losing material apparently would be queen d3, but this self pins again this knight. The knight comes to d7, probably next on b6, and computer is suggesting the best chance here would be sacrificing the queen. So something like this: bishop here, and then knight takes c8, black goes bishop c2, and then queen will try go around probably for the b2 pawn. So black is still in driver's seat, but far from being clear-cut winning, right? What happened in the game? Daniel tried to go for the knight d6 here, basically try to muddy the waters, keep the 3 pawns for the piece. Practically speaking, this is very much understandable. Rook takes c3, rook takes c3, queen takes c3, but Fabi on seconds here finds a very nice knight e4, and point being that after queen c8 you may think that you have this trick queen f5, but no, queen g6. He was saying that he saw this trick at the end of the line, and queen e5 now tides turn in black's favor. Knight goes to c5. This knight cannot be captured because queen b1 is a back rank checkmate. Knight d2, queen c2, queen returns back to e1. Decisive mistake. Apparently h3 would be better, but understanding that this knight can be basically given up because then you have check and check here. It's not easy. So especially with 4 seconds on the clock. White plays queen e1, knight d3, queen back to e4, check g6. Now the knight is hanging, back rank here is hanging, queen e3 check, and the very precise knight f4 decides the game. f1 checkmate is threatened, and even if white tries here to play for the clock, there is no way because queen f1, queen g2 is going to be a mate. So it's basically made in 3 moves. That was game 1. Next, I want to move to round 7 because I thought that was really important for the cross table. So Fabi, Magnus, Hikaru, and Jan all were 7 out of 7, which is, I think, a rare sight. You would think that lose a few points earlier on. 7 out of 7, maybe 4 out of 4 is not that surprising. 5 out of 5 even, but 7 out of 7, that was something else. So Fabi played Magnus and Hikaru played Jan. Alright, let's review both of those games. First, let's see Fabi versus Magnus. Fabi starts with white c4, e5, d3. A very interesting setup that is becoming more and more popular. White basically wants to play reversed Najdorf. Okay, what I mean by that is the Najdorf line of the Sicilian is this knight f3, d6, d4 takes, knight f6, knight c3, a6. So this is the classical Najdorf, right? So d3 aims at getting that position with white. Okay, so white says, I want to avoid all the theory, let's go to this setup. Knight f3, knight c6, a3, d5, and that's exactly what happens in the game, e3. Now, there are a few setups there. White could have also, I guess, played e4. That is the standard idea in Najdorf as well. But e3 is more popular, or was more popular during Kasparov era, I would say. That kind of Sicilians. Bishop d6, bishop e2, a5. Now, black expands on the queen side and stops white from playing b4 early on here. I think actually going b4 here maybe would make sense for that reason. But alright, Fabi chooses to go bishop e2. a5 also wants to play a4 and fix this pawn structure, so white plays b3 not to allow that. And here Magnus decides to go very provocative g5 and king side attack. Alright, h3, h5, coming off of the recent Speed Chess Championship victory. I guess he was feeling inspired. Here, computer actually likes it. Maybe after g5, white didn't have to commit into this hook. h3 is basically a hook. Now black will have an incentive on the king side to attack, or I would say a target. Now, instead of h3, computer is suggesting just play bishop b2, if g4, then go knight fd2. Very old school, yep, here, and then knight c3. Basically playing those Sicilians with a few tempos up. This is actually very fun. I may have to give this one a try myself with white. I play quite a few English setups. All right, h3, h5, bishop b2. Now rook to g8, and we got ourselves a fight on the king side here. Fist fight, I would say. g4, hg, hg, and black wants to play g3, so white plays g3 first. Bishop goes to e6, knight c4. Although computer says that this is good for black, I think I would still prefer to play these positions with white. It feels a little more comfortable, and I would say easier to play. b5. Now this was the move that I think is already straight up suspicious. Black would be better off with something like probably maybe f5 here, or simply like queen d7. But okay, f5 also doesn't have an immediate threat. I guess f4 maybe, like knight d2, f4. Knight goes here. What's the evaluation of this position? Queen e7, and it's still about balance. So still very unclear. All right, so Magnus goes into this forcing b5 move, forcing the trades on d6, and I think Fabio was saying during the game that this looks a little off, and rightly so. After d4, I think white's play becomes much easier here. White wants to open up the position with a bishop pair, right? Which makes a lot of sense. If black was to defend the b5, which I think that's what black had to do here, queen b6, but because there's no e4, there's knight f6, and if d5, knight e4, and f2 is hanging there, but I guess simply knight c3 here would make sense, or maybe takes and then knight c3. Knight c3 immediately computer likes more. Okay, Magnus decides to sacrifice the pawn on b5 here, but Fabi does not take that immediately. First he goes knight d2 to attack the e4 pawn, and basically returning the ball into black's side here to choose whichever pawn they want to lose. Do you want to lose e4, or do you want to give me b5 pawn? So black decides to give up the e4 pawn, knight takes e4, f5, and rook to c1. I thought actually watching this during the game, rook c1 was very impressive here, so the knight is hanging, but the moves that Fabio was considering here was rook h6 and rook to c1, and then he was saying maybe I should just simply return knight back to d2, but he goes for rook c1, and it's amazing to see those are computers first suggestions. So rook to c1, king d7. Now Fabio was all right. This looks straight up bad. So I should be close to winning here. Rook h7. I thought actually this line was fascinating. Knight c7, queen c2, threatening the checkmate here. If you take there, oops, this rook is pinning the king, and king gets mated on c6. But okay, queen b6, and then game continues here. Maybe knight c3 now would make white's job easier here. But all right, immediately knight c3 also makes a lot of sense. But now black gets counterplay, the critical thing in time scramble. All right, the counterplay here. Without counterplay, I think Fabi would be able to convert this very easily, just a pawn up. So that's why the previous line that I gave, I thought would give him practically much better winning chances. Now rooks get traded on h-file, and black wants to basically annoy white with this h-file, like queen h2, queen g1, attacking the f2, and as we will see, that will play the role here. After knight b5, white is up 2 pawns, so game should be now definitely in white's favor. King d2, I think this was the critical move, and after the game also Fabi was mentioning it. King d2, avoiding these complications on the h-file, secure the king, and then go on with your life, basically, with a4, bishop a3, and bringing the bishop from that side. But Fabi decides to go a4 immediately, and now queen h2, bishop a3, and yes, white wants to win the d6 pawn here, and basically go for the attack themselves, but queen g1 check, bishop f1, f4. Now black also gets sort of counterplay of their own. E takes f4. Suddenly it's not so easy, because if you take there, g3. So e takes f4, knight f5, and now rook is coming from the e file. queen to e2, this was also sloppy, immediately taking on g4 there and then returning back to f3 and then king d2 would be better, but alright, you see computer says even this is +1 only. If queen f3 there, rook h2, and it's still a mess with a few seconds left on the clock, anything can happen still. Queen goes to e2, now rook e8, rook comes along the e file with the discovered attack threats. Apparently knight takes d6 was still a possibility here, and then goes king d2. But okay, if you have to sacrifice a piece there then to secure your king, that's already not a good sign, right? So king goes to d2, bishop retreats to f7, and suddenly white is in trouble here. Queen takes g4, takes on f2, bishop e2 now check, then takes on b3 with the check, takes on g3 all with the check, and suddenly dust has settled and Magnus is winning. The classic scenario, right? Chess is the game where a lot of strong players play and at the end Magnus wins, right? Still, we are still in that era, as we saw at the Speed Chess Championship. So knight takes g3 here. If rook c2, there will be bishop h5, and e file is a problem. White's gonna lose the bishop on e2, king f2, and he loses here a piece and then basically falls apart. Knight d3 loses the rook as well. So one chance was all it took for Magnus to turn the tides around. Clutch win and disappointing loss for Fabi. I was watching him. He was heartbroken, which definitely is understandable. All right, now let's see what happened in the game between Jan and Hikaru. Game between Jan and Hikaru starts with e4 c5, and Hikaru chooses to go with his recently favored McDonald attack. He's been playing this a lot. I do not quite get why. I do not quite see what the attraction with these positions is. He goes then bishop b5 check, bishop d7 takes, d3, and basically this equal system where you can see computer is giving black a little bit of an advantage already. All right, e6, queen goes to e2, knight goes to f3, knight c6, c3. Now, I guess he just wants to avoid the theory and play more structurally rather than concrete theory. I'm not sure. Long castle, knight f3, bishop to d6, e5, center gets closed. White now most likely is going to castle short, but not immediately. First he goes d4, c takes d4, c takes d4, and we have ourselves opposite side castling. Okay, Jan's approach was quite interesting here. Basically, he got into French without the light square bishop, right? On the c8, which is usually a problem child in black's position. So one could say this is a dream French for black. Right, knight goes to a3, king goes to b8, bishop e3, check on a5. Now white loses castling, but I thought that was their plan the entire time. Maybe if short castle, he didn't want to give black incentive to start attacking on the king side. f6, g3, h6. So now king side is about to open up. Knight lands on a very comfortable square here on f5, bishop f2, bishop b6. So if we look in terms of minor pieces, black's superiority on of minor pieces, I think, is very obvious, right? Compared to this knight, passive bishop on f2, and alright, knight on f3 is probably the only piece that is doing its job. So g5, little iffy. Computer says take first and then go g5. Why rush? But Jan goes g5 immediately. Takes. Apparently Hikaru could have taken here, but he didn't. But I still like black's position after taking on f4. F takes, h3 to stop g4. Makes a lot of sense. Rook h2, g8. Black now, I think, will be preparing h5 and g4. So white plays g4 themselves to kick the knight away. Knight e7, bishop g3. But now that white has played g4, f4 square has been weakened, so this knight is gonna reroute towards f4, and that's what happens. Rooks get on the f file, king h2, knight to f4. So black is at the edge of winning here because minor pieces are much better, king is much safer, black king is completely safe, while white king is still in trouble here. Maybe rook f2 and trying to double up on the f file. So h5, we have first blunder in the game. Jan blunders, knight takes g5 here, and suddenly Hikaru is back in the game. So instead of h5, apparently preparing it with queen h7 would be stronger, and then what? Let's say white does nothing. If white does nothing, okay, black goes bishop d8 to defend apparently this g5 pawn, and then h5 will come with devastating force. Okay, this king is going to be in trouble. If bishop f4, rook takes f4, and then the other rook comes to f8, tripling up, I would say, queen then on f7 and tripling up on the f5. So queen a3, h5 takes on g5. So Jan blunders a pawn. Takes there, rook takes g4, rook f4, and suddenly white is very much back in the game here. And computer says white is even better. Because after rook f8 here, wow, white could have won on the spot. I did not see this actually as it was happening. I was watching Fabi versus Magnus game. Apparently knight to b5, what a move. All right, this is a pretty cool tactic. And then rook f7, all right. Winning variation, if rook 1 to f7, then black saves the queen with knight e7, right? So the winning move is knight to b5 check, a takes b5, then goes rook f7, because now if you go knight e7, there's going to be mate in two moves. Queen a3 check, queen takes a5. Wow, very surprising actually. Hikaru misses that, goes immediately rook f7. Probably here he was getting too excited, thinking that he was winning, game was over. But after knight e7, we're back to unclear waters here. White is pawn up. They do have some initiative on the king side, but their king is also on the king side. So if position opens up too much, this king is gonna be in trouble. Rook takes g8, the rooks get traded, and apparently a mistake here that was critical. Bishop to h4, and I think Hikaru played this a little too fast. You can see his time on the clock. He has minute and 5 seconds at this point, and he makes that move instantly. Right, bishop h4 here, and blunders knight to f5. Now, desperado in a way, and also discovered the attack at the same time. So it's only a queen trade, but black's position gets way more active. Black pieces get way more active than a few moves ago when they were on the 7th rank. Now white has to take on d7 queen, knight takes on e3, and suddenly white's center is very shaky. This g4 pawn is hanging, so white is in trouble. Advantage is back into black's favor, basically. Bishop goes to f2, takes on d4, takes, king g3, so minor pieces get traded here, and we are back to equal material at the moment, but black has very few weaknesses, basically no weaknesses, right? hg, but this e5 pawn is going to be lost. So that's what happens here. Bishop to d4, apparently inaccuracy, something like going bishop c1, and then that way would be better, because bishop d4 allows knight c4 defense. That's actually ridiculous. What if black plays something else, king b8 here? But then this way, you at least manage to activate the knight. Okay? The way it continued in the game, takes the pawn, takes other pawn, attacking the knight, and now white is basically doomed, because black is gonna push their connected passers here on both sides of the board, in the center and on the queen side. So that's what happens, and Jan converts this pretty comfortably, basically pushes those pawns to promotion. So Jan and Magnus take the lead with 8 out of 8. That's actually bizarre. 8 out of 8. Let's see what happened next game between Jan and Magnus. Okay, round 9. Jan versus Magnus. All right, c4, e5. We have another English on the board. Knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, knight c6. This time we have 4 knights. Both of them bring the knights out. 4 knights English. d5, c d5, knight takes d5, bishop g2. Now, in the previous English position, we talked that the position would be reversed Najdorf, Fabi versus Magnus. This would be reverse dragon, basically. A Sicilian opening dragon variation, all right, with the reversed colors. Knight goes to f6. Black wants to secure the center here, make sure that there is no d4 or any kind of funky business. So short castle, h6, prophylaxis against, I believe, bishop landing on g5. And also asking white the question, all right, what are you going to do? White responds it with b4. Idea is if bishop takes b4, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, queen a4 check, attacking the bishop and checking the king, which gives white superior pawn structure and the bishop pair. So definitely black doesn't want to take on b4. Black plays bishop d6 instead, and suddenly white gets a pretty comfortable English setups here. Short castle, d3, a6, but very much still close to equality here. a6. Now white would have to trade that pawn on b5, after which their pawn structure will be a little weakened. Bishop to e3, bishop goes to b4 to attack the knight, knight a2 attacking this bishop back, knight takes f3, bishop takes f3, bishop to d6. You can see here computer considers knight f3 little inaccuracy, saying that that knight is too important of a piece to get traded just like that, and goes bishop c5. Why not? This pawn hanging takes, rook e8, and then counterplay related with knight g4. All right, sacrificing the pawn there is not so straightforward, so I do not blame Magnus. Knight takes f3, bishop returns back to d6. Knight c3, rook e8, and advantage, I think, now is back into white's territory. Here, queen c2, queen d7, bishop g2, mainly due to the space advantage on the queen side and clearer targets than black. Okay, white has clear targets here, c and b files. What does black do exactly, right? So a takes b5, knight takes b5, c6. Now after knight trade for the bishop, now white is left with a bishop pair. Okay, but still shouldn't be too much of a deal, since black has no clear weaknesses in the position. Repeating here moves once more. Queen returns back to e7, bishop goes to c5 attacking the queen, queen to e6, and now rook returns back to b1. I was wondering actually during the game while Jan was playing, why not a5? Why doesn't he just play a5 and maybe park the bishop on b6 there? And computer apparently agrees with me. That would be a better move to also fix white's pawns. Knight takes e4, bishop, something like that here, and then e3, or bishop to b6 and then e3. I think in both cases white's position is much simpler to play. Now with rook e to b1, apparently takes, knight takes e4 here. Black manages to simplify the position. Now a4 is a target, bishop d4, queen g6, and we are back onto equality here. Queen g6 does create a very cheeky trick here. If, for example, white tries to play normal looking move e3 here, well, first of all, bishop f5 looks menacing, but I thought there would be also this kind of knight takes g3. If you take there, then knight e2, king h1, and then takes back. Knight e2, a very nice intermediate move here, checking the king and winning the pawn. But apparently this knight may get in trouble here, so it wouldn't quite work as efficiently on e3. But if white was to lose here the focus for a little bit, played something like rook b3 maybe, right? Then knight takes g3, and now queen g6, knight takes e2. This is completely game over, 2 pawns, and knight is quite safe on e6. So rook b2 was an important defensive move here to secure the queen. Now bishop goes to f5 and queen b3, also moving the rook away from this x-ray, right? Queen b3 now will be hitting the b7 pawn. Rook goes to d8, bishop retreats. Rook d7, defending the b7 pawn. a5, queen f6. Now little bit of shuffling here. Knight d6, creating the knight c4 threat. But one thing that I was really impressed in this tournament was how well Jan managed his time. You can see on the clock that although there is a lot of shuffling going on, White still has a comfortable lead on the clock. And I believe that was the decisive factor in the game here. Queenside pawns get traded. Now c6 pawn is somewhat weak, but that shouldn't be a big problem because only one weakness does not lose the game, right, as they say. Knight c3 now going for the counterplay towards basically e2 pawn, but few more here moves. Rook c1, knight d5, rook f3. I thought actually during the game this rook on f3 would be quite weird, but again, the important moment here is, or important element here is the clock situation. I could see Magnus getting uncomfortable here already. So although position is still basically about equal here, queen g6, queen c4, rook e4, and queen to b3. Wow, that was apparently a blunder, but 9 seconds versus Jan's 28 seconds. That's a big difference on the clock. Apparently this was a blunder because it allowed knight to f4, threatening now e2 pawn and rook d1 checkmate. Wow. Wow. h4, rook d5, king moves on the side, knight d5, and now black gets a lot of initiative apparently. But what happens in the game with 9 seconds on the clock? I do not blame Magnus for not finding. Plays a normal looking rook e8, queen d3, and after queen e6 here, black would probably be slightly more comfortable due to this triple up on the e file, but he hallucinates. The man himself hallucinates and falls for rook takes e2. Right, this trick. The trick here basically is he thinks that after rook takes e2, queen takes d3, and if rook takes d3, rook takes e2, and black just won a pawn and has all the reasons here to play for the win. If you take queen g6, then f takes g6, and again the pawn up, right? But the problem with rook e2 is simply here. The reason why it is a blunder is rook takes e2, and when you take queen d3, rook takes e8 with the check, intermediate move, Schwichenzug, as Germans like to call it, and then wins a lot of material. So after rook e2, he resigned immediately. Okay, so he is human. Magnus also blunders, especially when on seconds. So Jan takes 9 out of 9 lead, but story is not over. All right, there was one more drama here, one more round of drama. Basically, in the 10th round, Jan plays Oleksandr Bortnyk, all right, another top player on the server, okay, top grandmaster, I would say. Knight c3, d5, bishop f4, c5. Okay, Bortnyk likes to play these Jobava London positions a lot. I've played bunch against him. He pretty much consistently uses now this this line, and he even has a course on it, I believe, with Daniel Naroditsky. Now bishop f4, c5, e4, and we are already in a wild position here. I am not familiar with the theory, so I'm gonna refrain from giving an expert opinion on this. I know knight e4 is a line, but Jan chooses to go with c takes d4, queen takes d4, knight c6, bishop b5, now pinning the knight. So Jubao London is a very sharp position, and if you're well prepared in those positions, you can get anyone into trouble, okay? And I think this game is a very good illustration of that. Bishop d7 here to unpin the knight, takes on c6 since the queen was under attack, takes back with the bishop and e5, attacking the knight, and after trading the light squared bishops, now white chooses to close the center and basically make the c6 bishop passive. Knight retreats back, e6 to delay black's development. e6 practically, I thought, actually was very strong, and he plays it very fast too. That means that he has seen this idea before, sacrificing the pawn here, but now black's development will be very problematic. All right, they would need extra few moves here to get something going, maybe queen b6, but meanwhile white plays knight f3, queen b6 happens on the board. Obviously after sacrificing the pawn, white does not want to trade queens, so queen to d2 and d4. Excuse me. d4 I thought was interesting practical choice by Jan here, and played it very fast too, so he was probably also familiar with it. Now, why would black give up this pawn? To open up the bishop, right? That pawn was not worth having this bishop stuck forever on c6, so that bishop wants to come back to life. What did I do wrong, man? Get me back to life. Queen takes d4, queen takes d4, knight takes d4, queens get traded off the board. Black takes on g2, rook g1, and looks like black managed to trade queens, and they are up some material here, 1 pound to be specific, but this does not solve all the problems of development. Here, black is still lagging in development. Bishop, rook, and basically the king side is at the moment sleeping. So after e5 here, knight goes to e6. Jan goes wrong with e takes f4. I thought actually bishop e5 would have happened here, but Bortnyk goes with knight e6 here, creating few threats. Knight c7, and obviously maintaining this threat of rook takes g2. Okay, correct move apparently here would be moving the bishop away, but Jan misses it, takes the bishop with e takes f4. Now white also takes the bishop, and we are back into this position where black is struggling to get the pieces out, and obviously knight c7 is a threat. So what would be a better move instead of ef4? Apparently bishop to c6, and if knight c7 check, king f7 takes on a8, sacrificing in exchange, but now exchanging the pawn, and those now kingside pieces are gonna come back into the game, which will give a lot of life. So black is actually better here even. And bishop c5, and 4 versus 2 on one side of the board, plus a bishop pair. I can totally see that. I would definitely like to play black here. So Jan does not sacrifice material. So rook takes g2 here, king f7, apparently check, king back, long castle. Now tides are turning here, rook c8, knight d5. Apparently e5 would be a possibility here, so I'm not sure why Jan would not do that, but he didn't. He goes knight d5, h6, kicking this knight away, and then now knight comes to e6 to clamp again the black's position. g5 is a blunder. Oh, so Jan blundered in this game. That's what really happened here. You could have a knight c5, and it's still unclear because king f7. All right, rook d5, knight e4, probably like rook d4. So white most likely is going to win that pawn here because you gotta go back. You can't take there because of rook f1. So then rook f4. White is gonna win that pawn, but is that going to be enough? I am not sure. All right. So what Jan does is g5 and blunders in exchange. Knight d to c7, and now the knight on d7 is hanging. So if if you move the king away, then you lose the knight. So instead, what black does is rook takes c7, knight takes c7, goes king d8, and now game is kind of over. Plus 3 here, and not only in terms of the material, because black does balance it a little bit, but there is no counterplay. Before this rook gets back into the game, white now goes h4, then one more time there, apparently rook g4, weakens black's pawn structure, and then we'll take these pawns one by one. So the rest of it here was pretty much, let's see if you blunder anything. Okay, but Bortnyk does not blunder anything and converts here pretty comfortably with a full exchange up. And b6, and brings the king over. Now this rook gets stuck on a6 very awkwardly, and then white is just an exchange up. That means rook for a knight. So as far as white doesn't blunder anything, it should be easily convertible. Okay, a little bit of shuffling, then he gives up, then exchange back to get this pawn. But now the issue is going to be this rook will not be able to come back into the game ever, pretty much, without giving up the material. Okay, and if it does come back, then the pawn endgame, this pawn is just gonna promote. So that basically decides the game here. Okay, he tries to bring that rook at the cost of a pawn, but then he loses the other pawn. So it's way too many pawns here for white. So Bortnyk beats Jan and ties 1 round to go. Okay, so now let's see what happened in the last round. In the last round, we have Magnus playing Bortnyk, and we have Jan versus Denis Lazavik. Okay, let's see Magnus's game first. Magnus's game starts with d4, knight f6, knight f3, b6, c4, bishop b7, knight c3, g6, double fianchetto, d5, d6, e4, bishop g7, bishop to e2, knight bd7. By the way, let's talk a little bit about d5, since black does not take control of the center here, or doesn't even try to with e6 and may potentially d5. White takes control of the center here with d5. So we can see that computer already likes white a lot because of the space, okay, and the central control here. e4, bishop g7, then bishop e2, short castle, knight c5, queen goes to c2 because the e4 pawn was hanging, a5 to not allow b4, bishop e3, short castle, rook a to d1. Pretty standard here. Queen goes to c8, rook to f e1, e5. Apparently knight d4 would be better. If e5, then going knight to b5. All right, Magnus goes rook f e1, standard move, e5, d takes e6. Apparently this move was unnecessary. It would have been better to keep the pressure, considering that b7 bishop right now is not a happy piece. Okay, hitting this bishop, hitting this brick on d5. But okay, Magnus didn't want to keep the position closed. I think he takes on e6, knight takes e4. I thought this was interesting moment during the game to imbalance the structure. Instead of taking back on e6 here, Bortnyk takes on e4. Knight d5. I was not sure what was the response on knight d5. I guess you gotta move the king away, right? And then takes on f7. But okay, Magnus takes on f7 first and then goes knight d5. Still, position is at the moment probably slightly better for white, but black has a lot of counterplay here. White is well centralized, all pieces are well placed, but black also has the dynamic equilibrium here. Okay, rook a to f8, bishop d4, then black trades the bishop for the knight, and then decides to go for the counterplay with rook takes f3. Computer does not allow this sacrifice. F takes g takes f3, knight g5. Now this f3 square needs to be protected, so bishop to g2, takes on f3, takes rook takes f3. This king does look quite loose here, I would say, but queen to e2, attacking the rook. I thought queen g4 check here would be forced, but Bortnyk plays queen to f5. Bishop takes g7, king takes g7, queen e7 check, king goes back to g8. So where is the win? I don't think there is a forced win here. Queen d8, king g7, and Magnus goes rook d4 to secure the g4 square. So no checks. Okay, Bortnyk says, let me try to trade off rooks, so then I can try to annoy your king with checks again from g4. They repeat the moves here once, and then Magnus goes to grab this pawn on c7 with the check. King goes to h6, and here comes the critical moment of the game. Magnus has 18 seconds, Bortnyk has 12 seconds, right? Queen g4 check and check on the light squares is what white wants. So only way to win here for white without too much complications would be securing the g4 square. Okay, how does white secure the g4 square? I was thinking actually during the game of this move h3, but that leaves the queen too far away from the king. Okay, so that then knight d3 here, and apparently attacking the rook and the f2 square, this would still be a draw. Okay, somehow it still ends up in a draw. I don't know how, but something like that. Queen g2, king e1, and then we got ourselves perpetual. All right. What would be the winning move here is queen to c8 to secure the g4 square. And if queen g5 check, then simply either king h1 or king h1 allows queen d5 with the check, so king f1, and then bringing the queen back into the defense with queen h3. Also, queen c8 is nice because it doesn't allow knight d3. There is queen h3 check, hitting the knight, right, and checking the king. So queen c8 would have won the game, but Magnus goes queen e7 and allows the perpetual. Queen g4. I think he kind of panicked actually with a little time on the clock and was not sure here what to do. But why not play rook d3, rook e3? Actually, I'm not sure about that because at least now he has to find. Well, this is also pretty straightforward actually. Queen g4. We go here, queen e4. So white's not gonna be able to avoid checks. Goes queen e7, queen g4, king f1 check, and king cannot run away because if white is trying to be greedy here, they are getting mated on the next move. So king g1 and back and forth. So that was around 11 for Magnus. Okay, now all the eyes was on Jan. Okay, would Jan be able to win? And he delivered. All right. Jan played Denis Lazavik from Belarus, I believe. Denis been also one of the top blitz players on chess.com. He's played the Champion Chess Tour, I believe, this last years, and has shown a very high fighting spirit. Knight f3, knight to c6, bishop goes to c4, bishop c5, d3. Jan chooses to go with the Italian. Knight f6, a4, d6, bishop e3. Early bishop e3. I think this is an indication that Jan says basically, I do not want to engage into too much theory. I want to play schematically here. Let's play equal position and go for the long grind. Okay. Against a young player, I think it makes actually a lot of sense. Right? Bishop b6, short castle, h6, knight c3, not even like c3, which is probably, but actually if a4, then c3 doesn't make sense. If you play c3, then you probably don't go a4, then go bishop b3, bishop c2. h3, pretty standard here, bishops get traded, both bishops, and we have Italian position that a lot of people dread. I do not dread actually these positions. I think that it is quite interesting how this works. All right, knight g6. Now black has a strong center and the f file. White will try to get d4 going here and then bring the rook on the third rank, rook e1. So it is very double-edged. Position is very double-edged. For a lot of people, it is a little dry. Okay. d4, e d4, c d4, rook to f7, rook e1, rook f8, rook a3. So whatever we talked about, basically so far pretty typical from both sides. This e5 pawn gets traded for the d4 pawn. Now rooks are gonna come to either d3 or e3, and white also, this rook defends the f3 knight. And knight goes to h7. Jan decides to retreat on f1, queen e7. A little bit of shuffling here, both sides. I'm not sure what they are trying to do. Knight h2, knight f4, h4. Now this is the first moment where probably they both start to do something, basically. h4, securing the g5 square. So there is no knight g5. Then I'm assuming white will want to play g3 and king g2. That's what happens after knight retreats back to g6 here. White improves a little bit here with g3, king g2, secures g5 and f4 squares, and next is e5, I believe. So if I'm understanding this correctly now, computer agrees with me, so that gives me confidence to say that whoever plays e5 first will probably be decisive. If white was to go e5, then white gets a lot of space and the initiative basically. If black was to balance the center with e5, then probably position remains about equal. But we could already see that Denis was uncomfortable. He was taking a lot of time, and Jan was playing pretty fast. 97 b4 is gaining space everywhere now on all sides of the board. Knight retreats back. Rook c3, putting the pressure on c pawn. Knight c6, apparently an inaccuracy here, and now knight gets into a very passive position here on d8. I'm not sure why was that necessary, and why not just retreat back to e7. I'm assuming white would probably still go e5. Is that true? Well, we're saying do not rush. Maybe play something like queen b3 first. That's actually what happened in the game. Knight d8, queen b3, and then e5. Okay, I think white could have gone e5 immediately here. But all right, e5. Now some progress here, right? White wants to trade there, go rook e3, put the pressure on the e6 pawn. So black decides now to close it up, but that should give white a lot of advantage here on the king side, because white is pawn up there, right? And black has no counterplay on the other side of the board. So first Jan makes sure that there is no c5 business happening, and then he will regroup on the king side. Okay, so he starts regrouping with knight g1, knight h3, queen on back on b4. I thought he was gonna bring the queen on the king side here, but queen b4, I'm assuming the threat of invading the 7th rank here, that's actually gonna put a lot of discomfort into black's position there. So black does not allow it. Rook e2 against some more shuffling, and f4. So that was the idea why white would play knight g1, knight h3 here to expand on the king side. f4. Now I'm assuming that next would be like something defends the f4 pawn, maybe then g4, h5, and gaining even more space on the king side. But this gradual improvement. So that's, I think, what is really difficult about this position for black. White has endless ways of improving their position little by little, and black is running out of useful plans. Okay, so eventually here Denis gives up the pawn, sacrifices the pawn to open up c5 for some breathing air. Queen b6, rook c2, but Jan converts flawlessly, almost, I would say. Here rook c3, knight f3, and look at the position from few moves to now. White is pawn up, knights here are excellently placed, d4 is blockaded, and black pieces are scattered around in a very sad fashion. A little bit more shuffling, and also, as I mentioned in the previous game of Jan managed time very well in this tournament, so that is again a huge factor here. 23 seconds versus black's basically playing on increment, right? 3 seconds here. So it was a one-sided affair here. Rook c6 attacking the pawn on e6, knight e8, rook c8. Now this knight is in trouble. Then Jan decides to trade queens. Rook takes c3. If you do not trade queens, then takes their rook, queen c8 is coming. So black has to, and then a knight gets on d4, g4 now. White will want to push f5. Knight c6 is an outpost. I think f5 is what happens there. Okay, black manages to trade rooks there, so I guess white would have played rook c8 earlier on, but it's still a game over, because now knight is gonna come to f4 and will want to basically trade everything on e6. That's a very straightforward plan here, and that's exactly what happens, and black resigns, because you take king d4, game over. Black is in zugzwang, has to move the king, and then they're gonna lose the d5 pawn as well. What a victory by Jan. some very interesting games. It is fascinating to me to see all elements of the performance, I would say, and I think listening to Fabi earlier on, what Jan did really well here is staying present in those scramble moments, okay, and sharper than all the rest. Impressive win. Do let me know. What do you think? Did you like my reviews? Do you want to see more of it? I thought I would share it with you. So let's see how it turns out. Cheers. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. It helps the channel and me a lot. And I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.